大家好，欢迎大家收看安娜看法节目。经营企业需要在风险和收益之间找到平衡。根据安娜律师楼的霍华德·科恩律师的看法，债权人和员工常常都是让企业主头疼的两大难题。Howard 的律师他有几十年的实战经验，他专门帮助企业应对债权人，并且处理与员工的纠纷，保护自身的利益。关于这个话题啊，霍华德律师今天会和我们分享一些实用的策略。Hi, Howard. It's great to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
我的第一个问题就是，债权人其实是会让很多企业主头疼啊。您觉得企业主在这方面最大的风险到底会是什么呢？Creditors can be a real headache for business owners, Howard. What do you think are the biggest risks they face?
Okay. First off, businesses need creditors because what that means is businesses have borrowed something from the creditor to run their business. And so they're leveraging that loan to help make them money. And businesses make money based upon the leverage. But it has to be paid back. And so you want to make sure that the agreements you have with the creditors are negotiated so that the terms are reasonable or advantageous to you. Repayment terms, interest, deductions for early payment are things that all need to be considered in negotiating with creditors. Another thing is creditors are by definition a liability of the company. Well, you want to make sure that there remain a liability of the company and not the individual owners of the company. And this is a protection that owners of a company can use by setting up proper business formation, either a corporation or an LLC, the main purpose of which is to shield the individual shareholders in the purpose of a corporation or the members in a LLC from personal liability. So if something does go bad, the creditors can only look to the company and not to the individual owners for repayment.
好，非常感谢律师的介绍啊。在面对债权人追债的时候，企业主可以用哪些策略来保护自己的个人资产不被追索呢？When dealing with creditors, what strategies can business owners use to protect their personal assets, Howard?
The corporations and LLCs are the two primary things available in California to shield a business owner from personal liability. They just are formed a different way. A corporation has shareholders, and it is run by officers and directors, where a limited liability company does not have shareholders. It has members and is run by the managing member and is operated through an operating agreement. So the way they perform the function are different, but at the end of the day, they're both set of a different way to operate the business to protect the owners of the business from personal liability.
所以说刚才律师说商业的构架对于公司来讲很重要啊，所以我想问，有限公司和公司在责任保护方面到底有什么样的区别呢？Howard, just now you mentioned choosing the right business structure is very important, right? So what's the difference between LLC and corporations in terms of liability protection?
In terms of liability protection, they're really the same. At the end of the day, they protect you from personal liability. The key is doing the formation of the corporation or LLC and maintaining it. So you have to keep up the formalities of these business entities. And if you keep up the formalities, then you have the protection. What a lot of people do is they fill out the initial 1 or 2 page paperwork and file it with the Secretary of State of California to get their incorporation paper or their LLC paper. They use that to go to a bank and set up a bank account, and then they think they're in business and they're protected. Well, they're not. What they need to do is finish the formalities. With regard to a corporation, they need to have an initial meeting of shareholders. They need to elect boards of directors. The boards of directors then need to set up the officers of the corporation, and then they need to issue stock. These are minimum requirements in order to formalize the corporation and shield you with liability. If you think you're protected by just filing that one piece of paper and being a corporation, you're not. It just becomes a shell, and it has really no value. It's the same thing with the limited liability company. You don't just get the one slip of paper saying you're a limited liability company, open up a bank account, and think you're protected. You're not. You actually have to set up the operating agreement, which will list the how the business will operate, and will set up who the managing member is of the limited liability company, and who the members are, and what capital they have put into the company. Then those individual members, which are owners of the business, can be protected.
好，非常感谢 Howard 的介绍啊。在公司当中啊，员工的纠纷很容易升级。我想请问律师的是，您见过哪些常见的纠纷呢？而且企业主可以提前如何预防呢？ Employee disputes can escalate very fast. Howard, what are some common issues you have seen, and how can employers stay ahead of them?
Several issues. One, employees getting paid off the books. If you're paying them in cash, you're at risk because they can always hold you hostage and blackmail you because you're now doing something illegal. They're doing something illegal also, but the government cares very little about their illegality, and they care a lot about yours because you're the money and you're the one that they can get their fines and penalties from, and so that's what they tend to do. Workplace harassment is a big problem in California and could lead to significant awards for the employee and against the employer. One of the ways to protect yourself is through an employee handbook. The employee handbook sets forth all the things that the employer is going to give to the employee and all the things that are expected of the employee from the employer. Wage and hour issues are a headache for employers and are ripe for employees to sue the employers. Some of the things of concern are meal breaks and rest periods. By law, for all non-exempt employees, which are most employees, and I'll explain that a little later, they must get a 30-minute meal break every 4 hours and a 15-minute rest period every 2 hours. And that's got to be documented, because if it's not, then they will say they didn't get it, and you will have to pay them for all that time and penalties and interest and attorney's fees should they sue you. Now, that may not seem like a significant amount of money now when we're talking about it, but for an employee that's been working with you for a couple of years and then possibly leaves on bad terms, they go find a lawyer, and then the lawyer comes back and says, you didn't pay them 2 years worth of meal breaks and rest periods, and now we want $250,000 from you, plus attorney's fees of another $100,000. And so this employee that was not making that much money, you're looking at significant six-figure payouts, which again can break a small business.
好，非常感谢 Howard 的律师啊。其实有很多企业都忽视了员工的合同和公司的政策，所以我想请问您的是啊，您建议在合同或者是政策里加哪些条款来保护公司呢？Many businesses overlook employment contracts and policies. What clauses or policies would you recommend adding to protect the company, Howard?
There are so many that you really want to have a comprehensive employee handbook to have them all listed. The first thing you're going to want to have is to show that they are an at-will employee, which means they can quit at any time and you can fire them at any time. Because if you don't, then they can say that they have a long-term relationship, and as long as they're working, you have to pay them. And so being an at-will employee is very important. You then have to list what their hours are and if they are entitled to work overtime. And an exempt employee is a manager who's making over $65,000 a year and is managing more than one employee under them. And they can be exempt, and you can pay them a salary, and however many hours they work really doesn't matter. But for most employees that are making less and are just non-manageable staff, you have to pay them an hourly wage, and that wage has to be at least the minimum wage. And then they get time and a half for anything over 8 hours a day or 40 hours a week. And then in some instances, they can get up to double time for certain holidays or working 7 days a week. And you have to have what the working hours are, when you expect them to be at business, when you expect them to leave, when they have to leave and they can't be on the business, to make sure that they're not doing personal things on company time and using company resources for personal items. There's just many things that are in an employee handbook that sets out the rights and liabilities of both the employer and the employee. Our employee handbook that now we do for most of our companies is in the neighborhood of 50 pages. So it's a very comprehensive document, and it's something every employer that has one or more employees should have. It's just good business to get it set up in the beginning.
好，非常感谢律师的介绍啊。如果说企业遇到了员工的一个无故解雇或者是歧视的指控，到底应该怎么做才能够保护自己呢？If a business faces wrongful termination or discrimination claims, what steps can employers take to protect themselves, Howard?
The first is have that specifically laid out in the employee handbook. We have several paragraphs specifically with regard to a hassle-free and discriminatory-free workplace, and what measures the employee does if they feel like they're subject to some kind of sexual harassment. And they first go to their supervisor, and then the supervisor does an investigation. They question the other person. They come to a resolution. So all the different steps that are supposed to be taken with regard to these kind of issues are set forth in the employee handbook. And then the employer should adhere to the different requirements that they're supposed to do should there be a claim from the employee as set forth in the employee handbook. And that's the best way to protect themselves. If they end up getting into a lawsuit, I have found that getting the thing resolved quickly tends to be in the best interest of the employer. These kind of cases take a life of their own. Many of them are covered by attorney's fee statutes. So if an attorney's taking up the other side suing you and you lose, you may have to pay their attorney's fees also, which can be significant. So getting the thing resolved quickly, even if you think you're paying more money than you probably should pay, it's probably cheaper in the end. And we go through that. We get these a lot, and we discuss these with our clients, and we find out, did they have the employee handbook? Did they follow the employee handbook? What did they do? It should all be documented. And then we explain to them what their risks are if they litigate it, and what the costs will be, and what, should they settle. And then that is not a lawyer's decision. That's the company's decision. That's the employer's decision. We can make a recommendation, but ultimately it's their risk. It's their decision.
好，非常感谢律师的介绍啊。有没有哪些信号可以帮助企业主提前发现潜在的员工或者是债权人相关的诉讼风险呢 Are there any red flags business owners should watch for to spot potential lawsuits from employees or creditors before they happen, Howard?
Sure. Number one is fraternizing in the office. When you see generally males and females fraternizing together, it can lead to sexual harassment, especially if it's somebody from a management position having some kind of affair with a subordinate. Those are very risky, and if things don't go right, it's ripe for lawsuits. Another thing is drinking on the job. If you suspect that somebody is under the influence of alcohol or under the influence of drugs and they're coming into your business, there's lots of liability. And again, this is extensively covered in the employee handbook, which is why, again, I strongly recommend that every business get an employee handbook. When we have these red flags, we try to call people in, we give warnings, and up to termination if the problem persists, because you got to have a business that's run like a business. It's not a fraternity. It's not a place for play. People should feel comfortable there, but everybody has their own problems and issues, and horseplay shouldn't be tolerated. And you want to make sure that the business perceives to their employees that this is a business place and everybody should be conducting themselves as professionals.
好，非常感谢霍华德律师今天和我们分享了那么多实用的建议啊。在节目结束之前，我还想请教一下，如果说要给企业主一个最为重要的建议，教他们同时防范债权人和员工的风险的话，我想请问一下律师，您会说什么呢？Thank you, Howard, for sharing so many practical tips with us today. Before we wrap up, if you could give one business owners the most important advice on how to protect themselves from both creditors and employees, what would it be?
Well, with regard to employees, again, the most important thing is to have an employee handbook and have an employment agreement with the employee to make sure they're properly classified and properly paid. It may hurt going in, but believe me, it is the number one place where employers get into trouble. So pay them the proper way, get a payroll company to help do your payroll so that the proper things are taken out of their payroll truck. Pay them on time, pay them as they're supposed to be paid, have the proper deductions, and then your risks are greatly diminished. With regard to creditors, get the LLC, get the corporation. They're not expensive to set up. They're not expensive to get them formalized and capitalized. And if you just keep them up, it's just a little bit of work every couple of months, and then you should be protected from personal liability should something bad happen.
好，今天非常感谢安娜律师楼的霍华德律师和我们大家聊了那么多有用的信息啊，也感谢大家的收看，我们下期再见。Thanks again to Howard for sharing such practical tips, and thank you all for watching. See you next time.
Bye-bye.